Nobs will do. Everybody's gone home, I suppose.
Well, yeah, with it being Easter Sunday and everything, too.
What do you mean and everything?
Well, between that and everybody being exhausted and tired.
Yeah, I know what you mean, yeah.
And it works a little better when it's turned on.
It is turned on, but...
Oh, okay.
Put a shilling in the meter. Punch it up, so that's no good at all. I've got laryngitis. Why don't you do better than that? What's wrong with it?
Okay, can you folks hear me?
No! 1, 2, 3. Doesn't go good either.
Because that's the one you're working on.
Oh, is it? Oh. Just walk about. We'll be with you in a minute. 1, 2, 3. Oh. There we are. There we are. Oh, that's too much. We're getting feedback.
Okay.
What? How boring this is. Can't you do something? Are you standing there looking handsome? What do you mean, my ring is making the feedback? A ring can't make feedback. It's not electric. This is the maddest session of it. It was all right yesterday with Louise. What's wrong with it now?
Maybe I'm a jinx.
All right. That's for my laryngitis. Doesn't mean that I'm playing Agador in England. Okay, here we are.
Okay, who's got the first question? Yeah.
How did Wuzzle come into being, like the first one on the show?
The question was, how did Wurzel Gummidge come into being, the first one on the show? Wurzel Gummidge is a good evening, madam. Very nice to meet you. Have you lost somebody?
Yes, I have. There was a bag in here with a box.
An old bag here? Stand up. Thank you, my dear. Oh. Did you have a good trip? Won't you... Oh, please stay. Oh, won't you stay? Oh, all right, yes. I have to go back to Texas. Well, how did Wurzel Gummidge start? You don't have to bend down, I can see you. I saw you last night in your lovely pink, or whatever it was. You look no good looking up there, you'll get no help. Goodbye, Gail, darling. Gail Bennett's off. Bye-bye.
Bye.
See you when I see you. What? I said, I'll see you when I see you. Get out of it, go on. Get your Stetson on and fly over. Back to Fort Lauderdale. Now, the question, how did Wurzel Gummidge get started? It was, Wurzel Gummidge was a famous book written by a lady called Barbara Eufen Todd in the 1930s. And hi! What? No, it's terrible, but there we are. But you went and had your lunch. I mean, it's the worst amplification I've ever heard in my life. It was very good yesterday afternoon. What the hell have you sold that kit? This is a cheap jack outfit we got this afternoon. Just because half the people have gone home, he just got some cheap jack second-hand lot that he got down the road. Anyway, we're getting by. Probably my voice will give out after the first 3.5 hours. It was bought by Keith Waterhouse and Willis Hall, two of our most eminent writers, playwrights and scenarists, and they bought it and they wanted to make a film out of it. And I used to make a radio show years and years and years ago called Waterlogged Spa, and in that radio show, you saw Jimmy doing yesterday, didn't you? You're doing all his voices. Well, that's what I do in England on radio in the early days before television. And could you close that door? Bill, thanks. And that's what I used to do. I used to do voices, eccentric voices. And they remembered a character that I used to do who was called the Postman. And he was a man who used and we had catchphrases in those days, like you did on your early radio. And he used to say, well, what does it matter what you do, so long as you tear him up? And that was his catchphrase. Everybody went around saying this as a catchphrase. And they remembered this character, this West Country character. And when they were casting Wurzel Gummidge, they said, "Oh, I know, we'll have Jan Putrid, you know, he'd be just the fellow for this because he's a tall, thin, decadent string bean. I mean, I was thinner than I am corpulently now. And they said he's just the chap to play it because of that character he used to play. And so they offered it to me, and I jumped at it because it's a marvelous book. If you've never read the book, if you can get a hold of it in Penguin, and any of you have got kids, it's a marvelous book for children, or for adults. If you like, anybody like Wind in the Willows? Yeah? Or you like Toad of Toad Hall, or all those things, and you like Winnie the Pooh? Yeah? Well, great. Right on. You're my type of people. Well, Wurzel Gummidge is in that genre. Very good. And so they said, "We're going to make it into a picture. Would you like to play Wurzel?" And I said, "You bet." But then we couldn't get the money together. That's the story and the history of British filmmaking. We can never get the money together. And that's why Wurzel's taken so long to produce. And we couldn't get the money together. And I said to the writers, "Would you write me a pilot for television? Because I think I'll send it to television." They said, "Yeah, sure." So they wrote me a pilot, and I took it to the BBC, because I've been working for them for years in a thing called Doctor Who, you may have heard of. And I took it to them, and I said, "What about this? Here's a great subject for you. What about it?" And they said, "No, thanks very much." I couldn't believe it, because it received... Any hands up, those of you that have seen it? Oh, only very, very few. But you will. You'll see it. It'll be around, and friends have got videos, and no doubt you'll be borrowing them. But we hope we'll send it soon. And they sold me this. So I then took it to Thames Television, because I'd been doing a series for them called Who Done It, which was a crime quiz. And I said, "There, the BBC have turned that down. What do you think of that?" And they said, "Not much." And so I was this time getting rather despondent, so I eventually sold it to Southern Television. And they were from the southern part of England, naturally. They wouldn't be Northern Television if they were in the southern part of England. They said, "Yes, we'll do it." And they bought it. And all I can tell you is that 5 weeks after we opened, and on our opening night, we became a cult. Like Doctor Who is a cult all over the world. And Wurzel Gummidge is a cult all over the world, except in the United States of America, which is rather sad. But we hope to put that right. I mentioned it yesterday. People say that the Americans can't understand English. Which is true, you know, we talked about that yesterday, said that this is too much, the dialect would defeat everybody, which is rubbish. And you can understand what I'm talking about, can't you, Mrs.? Yes? Yeah, sure you can, no problem, is it? Because I'm speaking American, really, aren't I, you see? Because it is, because the vowel sound's the same. It's from the West Country, that I was saying yesterday. It's where the American accent came from the Plymouth brothers in Plymouth. From the Plymouth all talk like that there, and they said, "Oh, that's right, remember Robert Newton? Me old darling." Well, that's where he came from. And it was R. Was that R? You say R. You see your R's R. Yeah, R, are you doing this? We say very properly. So, that's that question. Yes, lady there. Sorry, so. In country and western?
We always get a kick out of it.
Yeah. Well, now, I'll tell you how this all happened. Anybody heard of a man called Jimmy Rogers? Yeah? Good. Now, Jimmy Rogers and I were acquaintances. I met him in London. He was travelling around London on a bicycle, on an ordinary push bike. He was an extraordinary man, Jimmy Rogers. He's probably one of your greatest country and western singers, I would think. The greatest yodeling country and western singer. And he used to sing things like T for Texas and TB's Blues and all those songs. And I got to know him when he was wandering around London. I think I'm getting exhausted. And so he used to come back to my pad, and he used to play and sit and play. And there was another fellow that I knew called Rambling Jack Elliott. Have you ever heard of him? No? Oh, good, yeah. And he was another one, and we used to sit around and we used to play. And I learned a lot of songs from Jimmy Rogers, and I was always into country and western, and I like it. I like it very much indeed. I think Kenny Rogers is my most favorite singer in the world, and my wife's. We go a long way to see him. We have a tremendous amount of country and western appreciation in the United Kingdom. Wembley Stadium, one of the biggest stadiums in the world, is packed for a whole week. absolutely sold out every year after year after year, and all your top country and western singers come there, and it's always sold out, tremendously popular. And my wife and I last year, we traveled some 2,000 miles through the southern states and driving around really looking, getting to know your country, particularly around New Orleans and Louisiana, Lafayette and down south there. And then we drove up the famous Natchez, the Natchez Trace to Nashville. And there we went to Nashville, and we had the most wonderful time in spite of the fact that we got ourselves hopelessly lost in the wrong end of Nashville. I made a terrible mistake once, and I said that I thought that Nashville was probably one of the hideous, most ugly places I'd ever been to, and I was severely taken to task by two very good friends of mine, Terry and Patty, who were sitting over there, who were from Nashville, who have completely re-educated me. And they said, but you went to the wrong part, Nashville. And I now learned that I did, but I didn't have people like them to show me around, which they promised they will do next time I go. But I found what I wanted to find, and that is that I went to the Grand Ole Opry, and I went to the Grand Ole Opry twice, and I had the most marvelous time. My wife and I absolutely loved it. I'd love to have a piece of the action. What kind of business that is? They get paid millions for the shows they broadcast, and yet they charge the audience $15 a seat. That's clever business, isn't it? Get it always. So we love country and western, and for those of you that haven't seen me do cabaret, I do a skit on folk music, because I used to be a folkie. I used to play folk music in clubs. And so I do a general skit on all kinds of folk music, and I finish up with a country and western called Please Don't Tear That Little Brown Building Down. Do you hear? Yeah, sure. Yeah, next question. Yes? Where did I get that tattoo? How did you know I had a tattoo? Even with those feathers, you've been peeping, haven't you? Yeah, well, I'll tell you. What? Have you? Well, I'll tell you the story. If you've read my autobiography, you've had plenty of opportunities to buy it. But some SOB went and undercut me today, and I thought, why am I selling my books? He was undercutting me round the corner. But no, it all happened. I was in the lower deck of the Navy. I was the equivalent of a gob, just a Johnny Jack tar in the lower deck of the British Navy during the war. And they said, make up your mind when you join a Navy, Mike. He said, you want to make up your mind what you're going to be. You know, you're either going to be a bastard, or you're going to be a Burke, which I shan't tell you what that really means. It's Cockney rhyming slang, but it means a fool in a very rude and vulgar way. And so I made up my mind for the latter, and I thought, yeah, be a Burke, be a fool. And so I was the silly ass, and I wore a monocle, an eyeglass. I was the only man on the lower deck of the British Navy who ever wore a monocle. And the entire lower deck of the British Navy referred to me as Marmaduke. Yeah, hello, Mommy. How you doing, mate? Oh, good on you. Yeah. They all used to make these faces because I wore this monocle. And so in the lower deck of the Navy, when I was in the Hood, which was a battle cruiser that was blown up by the Bismarck, and I was luckily one of the survivors. I got off her when I was taken off her before she actually exploded. I had a birthday. And in the lower deck of the Navy, if you are sort of popular, they ask you to come round to the mess deck and have a tot of rum. We have naval rum, which you've never ever had anything like it. It is the strongest drink in the world. It's about 140% proof. You can say, I mean, how can anything be more than 100%, but naval rum can. And you've only got to have one little sip of it with water, and within 2 minutes you're going... if you're in a hard-line ship, I was originally in submarines, you get it neat, but in battle cruisers, because they consider that comfortable, they couldn't be more wrong. You get it, 2 in 1, which is 2 of water, 1 of rum. But nevertheless, it's a very potent drink. So you go around the mess deck when it's your birthday, and they say, hello, Marmie, right then, sippers. Now, sippers means you take his rum issue and you go, just that. You go to the next fellow and he says, oh, you're a good lad, Marmaduke, you're a good lad. Gulpers. Gulpers. Sandy Bottoms is... I had too many sandy bottoms. And to put it bluntly, I was pissed for 3 days. On the last day, all the lads did my duty for me on board. They were very good. They did duty for me, and they stood in for me. And they lashed my hammock, and they did all my jobs, and they all pretended they were me, which was rather difficult to do, because they couldn't keep the bloody monocle in. But, so I was lying going, like, in a hammock netting, which is sort of hidden by the lads. And I felt absolutely terrible. I said to one of the lads, "Oh, give me some water. Oh, water." Well, that's a big mistake. Whenever you get drunk on rum or anything, don't have a big glass of water because you're pissed all over again. So I had another day. I had another day of it, and oh dear, I wasn't well. And when I woke up, we had to run ashore on the 4th day. I was a Liberty man, and they lifted me up by the elbows and they took me ashore. And when we came back on, I decided that I wanted to be a real man, evidently, and be tattooed. And when I woke up the next morning feeling absolutely dreadful, I looked down at my arm and I saw that there was a piece of toilet paper strapped to my forearm with 2 elastic bands. And I said, "Oh no, I don't feel very well. Why have I got a piece of loo paper stuck on my arm with 2 elastic bands?" Well, during wartime, there was a very interesting loo paper which was provided by the services, which was impregnated with Izal, which was a disinfectant like Jay's fluid, and they considered that the tattooist thought this was a splendid idea, so having tattooed me, he slapped a piece of toilet paper on my arm. When I took it off, I went, "Ah." And there you see, to this day, my tattoo, which I will show you in a minute or two. And that's how I came to be tattooed. And it's got a C on it underneath the Cobra, because the submarine that I was in was called the Cobra. But I also had a beautiful Sinhalese girlfriend called Lotta Joachim. So the C might be for Cobra for a submarine, or it could be for Carlotta Joachim. And being the romantic I am, I like to think that it was for Carlotta Joachim. And the other day I was skiing in Andorra, where I have a home, and a man was talking to me that I'd never met before, and I said, "Where do you come from?" He said, "Well, I was born in Ceylon." And you know where Ceylon is? Sri Lanka. It's now called a tiny little island, southern tip of India. And I said, "Oh, good heavens." I said, "Before the war and during the early part of the war, I had a most beautiful girlfriend from Ceylon." And he said, "Oh, what was her name?" And I said, "Carlotta." And he said, "Not Carlotta Joachim." I mean, the world, how can you believe it? I mean, this tiny island, and there was this girl, and in fact, she knew him before she knew me. Damn him. Right. Next question. Yes, ma'am.
When you were first approached to do Dr. Maria, how much input did you have to how your doctor was played?
When I was first approached to play Doctor Who, how much influence did I have and how it was going to be played? Some of you would have heard this story before. Do forgive my voice, I have laryngitis and it's almost gone. What happened was this. I rang my agent one day and I said, "I hear that Patrick Troughton is leaving Doctor Who. What about putting me up for the job?" Hello? Richard? And he said, "Yes." I said, "Oh, good God, I thought you'd hung up." "All right, forget it. It was a bad idea." He said, "Yeah, I don't think it's a very good idea, but I'll do it if you like." So I said, "Yeah, good." So he rang up and he spoke to the producer of Doctor Who, and he said, "I've got a good idea for my client, Jon Pertwee." He said, "What about having him to take over from Patrick Troughton?" Hello? The fellow said, "Yes." And he said, "Oh, I thought you'd hung up." He said, "I had exactly the same reaction." And the producer said, "On the contrary," he said, "I'm absolutely staggered." He said, "Because you might be interested to know that Jon Pertwee is the second name on our shortlist." Now, that's absolutely true. I had no idea. For 18 months I'd been down on their shortlist, because Pat was never too sure that he wanted to stay in Doctor Who. He loved it, and now loves it all the more. Now he's coming to conventions. He's a very personal man, Pat. He's an actor's actor. And there it was. But so I suggested myself for something that they'd already had me down for. Now, I was basically a character comedy actor in those days, and I could not for the life of me see why on earth they got me down to play Doctor Who, but they evidently thought I'd be right for it. I then went and I saw Sean Sutton, who was the head of programs then, and I'd known Sean for years and years and years. And I said, well, I'm not sure whether I want this job. And he said, what do you mean, now you tell me? We've taken you out to lunch 3 times. I said, well, the BBC can stand that. And he said, well, I mean, what's the trouble? I said, well, how do you want me to play it? And he said, as Jon Pertwee. And I said, who the hell's that? Because I had never played Jon Pertwee in anything. I'd never played myself. I'd always hidden under a green umbrella, like my late very good friend Peter Sellers. You never saw Peter Sellers being anything else but a character actor. He was always different, and I was always different. I never played anything the same. If you've ever seen any of my movies, of which there are thousands on the late show, you'll see that I'm always playing a character, sometimes not recognizable, and that was on purpose in shows like Carry On. I did 3 Carry On films, and I covered myself in makeup so people wouldn't know it was me. So anyway, he said, as you, and I said, well, who the hell's me? I don't know, I've never played myself. He said, well, you'll find it somehow, and we'll go with you. And so that's the way I told you yesterday how the clothes came about, and I began to play just myself with a little tinge of comedy. If you see the first one, those of you that haven't seen my episodes, you'll see them in a couple of weeks. The very first one will show how I got out of the Patrick Troughton uncomfortable soprano making trousers into my beautiful dandy gear. You'll see how that all came about, well, that's how it happened. So the answer is yes. I mean, I didn't. Yes, I had a lot of influence because they just went with me. They let me play it the way I wanted to play it. It was me.
Now, I caught his cold. As with some of the people who've seen your unit episodes, you can tell that all of the unit guys and yourself are friends. And I personally know that you pal around a lot together. You've got some stories that I know they'd love to hear about some of the practical jokes that were on the set.
Yeah, well, I'm always a little loath to, because so often in these conferences I see old friends and they've heard the stories before, so forgive me if you've heard them.
That's all right.
Well, there's one that Sally just suggested that I'd tell you, which is about Nick, the Brig. The Brig is the most lovely man. I don't know, have you ever met him? Have you met the Brig? Nick Brig, lovely guy. He's one of what we call solid rock actors. He's like a stone wall. By that I don't mean that he's not malleable, he is. He's a marvelous actor to act with, but he is like a solid rock. So you can do all sorts of things around Nick and he'll be absolutely solid. He's solid on his lines, he's solid on everything else. He's solid on everything except driving a car. He's inclined to put it in reverse. Once John Levine and I were driving with him to London and we travelled 30 or 40 miles in 3rd gear. And we suggested that he put it up into top and he said, no, it doesn't use so much petrol in 3rd. Gas. So anybody who thinks that a car doesn't use as much gas, well, you have automatic, you don't know what I'm talking about. We change gear and we have petrol. But no, Nick is not a good driver and he doesn't like firearms, he doesn't like fisticuffs, although he's a brigadier in the army. But he really was excited when he was playing in Inferno because he was playing a dual role. And he had to play this sort of vicious Nazi criminal officer, and he wore a black patch and he had a big scar on his face. And so all of us got together, and Katie and I and John Levine, who played Sergeant Benton, and we all decided that we would walk into the Brig's study because he had his back to us on a spin chair, and he was supposed to spin round and face us. And we all put black patches on. We got black patches on, and we all had these black patches on, and we said, this will really dry Nick up, you see. So we went in and I said, there you are. Look, I want to see you, or whatever the line was, and the Brig spun round like that and took a look at us, and then these idiots all kind of with these black patches. And he said, yes, and I wanted to see you. And he went straight on acting. They paid no attention of any sort at all. Well, because we all got hysterical. And the director said, this has gone on long enough. Come on, it's a silly practical joke anyway. And then Nick said, oh, nothing to do with me. I don't know what's the matter with it. These idiots are all wearing black badges. And so the joke was completely reversed on us. We were very careful after that not to play tricks on Nick, because he would reverse them on us. One thing we used to play on Barry Letts. Barry was inclined to take things a bit seriously from time to time, and so we used to play a trick called the broken mic trick. Now in this, we would be rehearsed for a scene, and Barry would be up in the production box, and the director would be up in the production box, and the PA would be down on the floor, and he'd say, all right, Barry, and he'd have these cans on. I said, okay, ready to roll. And Barry would say, right, stand by, studio. Right, roll cameras. And the button presser would press all the buttons, and we'd come in, and I'd say, now look here, Joe. Don't you realize? Oh, here you will, son. Brigadier. And they said, cut, hold it. Hold it, studio, please. Well, the next time, he said, right, take 5. And we'd all have a cup of coffee and a cigarette, you see, and we'd sit it down, and he said, right, we can't find anything. The engineer said, I can't find anything wrong, sir. Right, ready to go. Right, roll them cameras, right, action. So I'd say, now look. Yeah. And the brigadier would say, now look, Doc. Out. That's really good. Swing. And Joe would say, out. Right, hold it. And so we did this for a long time. We had a very restful day's recording. Yeah. Anything else? Questions? Don't feel they have to be about Doctor Who. Ask any questions you like. Yeah.
Some of the voices for the animated segments of the Water Babies. Which
I
characters did you do voices for?
You probably heard the question, which voices did I do for the Water Babies? I do a lot of cartoon voices. As you know, I do Super Ted, which is shown on your Disney Channel. But I play Spotty Man. In that. But from the planet Spot, Super Ted's mate. In the film that you're talking about, The Water Babies, I played about 8 characters. I did that. I did all the frogs. And I chopped the lobster. John, the lobster, I tell you, you know, yesterday, James Stone was talking Scots, you know, and he was speaking very clear Scots, because if he didn't, you wouldn't understand the word he was saying. Now, in fact, if you go to Glasgow, I'll talk a bit like Glaswegians do. They say, here, I'll tell you a fifth here, Jimmy. Now you're totally hit it outdoors. Now I said, I'll tell you around California. And I'll tell you this, no, it's no you're putting your knees and you put your foot down your crease. Now I'll put your last bells around your foot and your knee. And that's how they sound, the Glaswegians. You don't understand a bloody word they say at all. And so that's why James Doohan chose a nice Aberdeen Scots, because Aberdeen people, they speak in the most beautiful tongue you've ever heard. And they say that it's the perfect English, even though they're Scots. And if you go up near Balmoral, where the Queen's Castle is in Balmoral, and the nearer you get to Balmoral, the slower they speak. And you may have seen, did you ever see a great film called Kidnapped, where there was a little boy, 2 little children, and they kidnapped a little buddy, and they called him Fido, because of Fredo. They thought he was a dog, do you remember? And that's how they speak up there. It's a beautiful way of speaking, very soft and very slow. I must tell you a funny story about Balmoral. My wife Ingeborg, who some of you may have met here, she comes from Germany, and she's a rather shy girl, although she is an artist herself in the respect that she's a writer. She's a novelist and writes corporate books and things. And one day we were up in Aberdeen working in the theatre there, and I said, well, let's go for a drive this afternoon. We'll go to, everybody seen Balmoral, the Queen's Castle? So she said, no, I'd love to see that. So we arrived at Balmoral Castle, and there's this enormous great gate in the front with a guard and soldiers on. And we arrived at this gate, and I drove towards the gate, and Inga said, where are you going? And I said, well, I thought we'd go and have tea with the Queen. And Inga said, don't be so stupid, what are you talking about? Tea with the Queen? Don't be ridiculous, embarrass me. And I went through the gates, and the soldiers saluted like that, and we went straight through into the gates of Balmoral. And Inga said, you're crazy, they'll get arrested, what are you doing? So we then drove up to the main door of Balmoral Castle, and I pulled the car up, and I walked up and said, come on, we're going to have tea with the Queen. And we went up, and I pulled the doorbell, and dong, dong went. And the door opened, and there was the butler, the major domo, Balmoral. "Ah, Mr. Pertwee, Mrs. Pertwee, you're very welcome. Step this way, please." And by this time Inga collapsed. Her knees were locking together. And she was absolutely petrified. She said, "You fool, you're really going to..." I said, "Yes, we're going to have tea with the Queen. I've known her since she's been a little girl with me." She said, "Whenever we're in town, you know, drop in." And he said, "It's ridiculous. With the look I'm wearing, I can't..." We went straight through Balmoral Castle and out the back door, along the back door, up a little garden path, and went into the gardener's cottage, because I know him very well indeed, where we had tea with the gardener. So whenever we were in that area, I used to pull this joke. It's no secret that I was married before. I was married to a lady which you probably know of, called Jean Marsh. You know, an upstairs, downstairs, and it was my first wife. And I pulled exactly the same trick on her. She fell for it too. We knew the gardener very well indeed, and he used to then take us around. We used to eat off the Queen's silver. But actually, I'm honoured and proud to say that I do know the royal family, and I have known our present Queen since she's been a little girl, and her sister, Princess Margaret, and Inga and I have quite a lot of laughs together on public occasions. She's a very naughty lady. Princess Margaret, people have to all line up to meet her, you see, and she has a lady in waiting and an aide-de-camp and so on. And we go to functions like big circus functions, and because I used to be involved in the circus, and we get involved in these big do's that she's present at. And you know, all these ladies and gentlemen are all terribly excited about meeting Princess Margaret, you see, and they're all lined up, and the lady in waiting's got them all queued up, and the gentleman in waiting is standing there introducing, what is your name? May I present you? And the last particular occasion I'm thinking of, Princess Margaret looked over like that, and she saw my wife and I standing having a tea cake or a ham sandwich and something right over there. And she just left the queue completely, with all these lords and ladies all waiting, and walked straight over and said, "Hello, how are you?" And then he went, And I said, "Hello, Mum, how are you?" And she said, "Fine." She said, "Can you get me a proper drink?" I happened to know her tastes, and I said, "Yes, I've got the bottle of scotch in the caravan here for you." So I gave her a big glug of scotch, and she went glug, 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 and she said, "I've got to go, I've got all these boring people waiting for me." And off she went back to her queue and said, "How do you do?" And then she immediately became the princess and became frightfully royal, you know. And anyway, our daughter, Daryl, was absolutely furious, and she said, "Well, why wasn't I there? You could have at least presented me, Papa. I mean, you know, I've never met a member of the royal family." And I said, "Oh, shut your face. Come in after the show, and perhaps she'll be there afterwards." So my daughter was working in the circus at the time, and so she came round afterwards, and we were all sitting around waiting for Princess Margaret to come in, and she came in, and there was this long queue again, and we told Daryl, my daughter, we told her the story of how she'd dropped the queue and come over, and Daryl was saying, "No, really, did she? Honestly?" And I suddenly saw this look on her face and said, "She's doing it again." And she left the queue, and she came straight over again, and she said, "Hello, is this your daughter?" And Darlow went to a curtsy and nearly fell flat on her arm. But she's a very super lady, Princess Margaret. And she came home one day, and she went up to her suite in Marlborough House, where she lives, and she waited. She rang her bell, nothing happened. She rang her bell again, and nothing happened. She got rather cross. And so she picked up her telephone, and she dialed down to the servants' quarters, and she said, and I quote, because I know who she said it to, she said, "I don't know what you old queens are doing down there, but there's an old queen up here dying for a gin and tonic." That is absolutely true story, I tell you. Our royal family, although they give the impression of being superior beings, are not at all. They're great, great people, and they do a wonderful job, because that's what they are. They are PR. They're public relations, as we are in a way. They're public relations for the United Kingdom, and they do the best job in the world, and that's why they're still the popular people they are. We love them. Yeah, next question. Prince Andrew's fiancée. Well, if I believe the Inquirer, which I never hesitate to buy as soon as I arrive in the United States, I'd buy the lot, we'd take them back and we'd devour them. I read with great interest that Princess Diana, our future queen, in fact, didn't want Charlie at all. She wanted Prince Andrew. And the Inquirer says, the Inquirer, who is it? Is it a friend or a confidant? What do they always say in the Inquirer? What? No, a friend, no, but not a friend. It was a lovely word they always use. A source. Yes, a source. Our source informs us that, in fact, yes, Princess Diana was in love with Andrew and she couldn't get him, and so she settled for Charles. A scurrilous story, ladies and gentlemen. How dare you spread scurrilous stories like that about our royal family. Randy Andy, yeah. Well, Randy Andy's thrown it about a bit, yeah. In fact, he threw it about a bit, a little too much. And the mum got a little cross, and she said, "Now, come along, this has got to stop." I mean, it wasn't a frightfully good idea, although she's a very super lady, and I've met her, Pooh Stark. But she, unfortunately, made the mistake of once in her early career doing a very soft porn movie. I mean, it wasn't really a porn movie at all. But she'd appeared in the nude, but so thousands of other people when the script calls for it. But nevertheless, they called her a soft porn queen, and that blew it, really. Otherwise, perhaps they might be married, which is rather a shame. She did marry the other day, but lasted about 4 days, I think. But now, Randy Andy's got himself settled down to a very nice girl, Sarah Ferguson. She happens to be the best friend of Princess Diana, and that probably had something to do with it. So she's got a fine tutor in her, because, my God, if ever there was a real good girl at her job, it's Princess Diana. She's a leader of fashion, she's a beautiful girl, and she's charming to people, and the public love her. And so she's got a very good tutor and a mentor Sarah Ferguson has in Princess Diana, and I'm sure she'll make him a very fine wife. Yeah. Yes, sir?
How did you go about choosing the boys for
Well, because, as I was explaining earlier, I did this radio series called Waterlogged Spy, where I played this postman, where I told you I used this West Country voice of this postman, and the writers, Waterhouse and Hall, remembered this voice, and they remembered the character, remembered what I looked like, and they put the two and two together, so it was a natural.
Okay, there's only one thing that some of the fans might not know is, that have seen the show, is that the finances were cut, is what they heard the last time, but aren't you going back into production with it?
Yeah, I can tell you what happened was that in England we have a completely different system of commercial television. Our advertisements have got nothing whatsoever to do with the programs. We have advertisements every quarter of an hour, but only for 2 minutes every quarter of an hour. Sometimes in the afternoons we don't have them on the quarter, we have them only on the half. And the sponsors of those advertisements have got nothing whatsoever to do with the programs. Nothing at all. So you can't, like, you know, one of your big concern here, like Coca-Cola, Coca-Cola can't say, I'll buy Wurzel Gummidge and I want to put out songs at a time, and they vie with each other for how much it's going to cost. You can't do that. We don't allow that. Because we think that's what, well, frankly, our television's a lot better than yours. Because I don't mean that derogatorily, because you make superb programs, but the way it's presented is diabolical. And how you stood for it, and I mean, you're too late to do anything about it now, because it's too commercialized. But I mean, how you can stand for watching a wonderful movie, and then 3 minutes before the end, an advertisement comes on for an underarm deodorant. I mean, it's lunacy. How the hell can you get something over? The only way to watch it is by having, like we do, either BBC One or BBC Two, or we have no advertisements, or you have a sponsorship, like you're beginning to do now, where a Coca-Cola will sponsor, and they will do a big puff at the end and a big puff at the beginning, and apart from that, they show it right through. So what happened to Wurzel Gummidge was that we were very much of a cult. We had, in our country, enormous viewing figures. We had 12 million viewers a week, which is colossal. I mean, you don't have figures like that in your vast country, because you're split up, but we go nationwide, you see. We're all national hookup, for most of the programs. And what happened was that the company, Southern Television, lost their franchise. That meant that their license to produce programs was withdrawn because they didn't abide by the ITA rules. There's a ruling body, like a royal family, and they didn't abide by the rules, and so they withdrew their license. And so we went out of the window with them. Nothing to do with the program dropping or anything else, but the program wasn't allowed to continue because there was nobody to produce it. We were desperately expensive. The BBC wanted to buy it, which would have been very funny, the BBC buying a commercial television program, but they were stopped at the last minute. And now New Zealand have bought it, New Zealand Film Finance Corporation, and they're putting the money up, and we're going to shoot it in New Zealand. It'll work, I think, it'll fit. Yeah, before everybody else walks out.
Yeah, I heard about a story you called Big Trek when you were filming a movie show. You had to drive a hydrofoil over a company.
You're too late, I told you yesterday. What, in making a Doctor Who? Oh God, yeah, hundreds of things. I can't think of it just at the minute. Oh yes, one story that I often tell is I'm the sort of folk hero figure, you see, and I do all these masculine things like, didn't you get any sleep last night? I'm sure you know. If anybody wants to lie down, feel free. Yeah, I was, so one has to sort of keep up an image. And we were making a Doctor Who, and it was in the pouring rain. And I had my hair rather bouffant in those days in Doctor Who, and so they used to help it along with the aid of Carmen rollers. It was longer in those days, so they used to give it a lift. Now, I have a very bad spine, which I injured during the war, and when it hurts me, I have to wear a brace, like a corset. And it was very cold, so I wore long johns underneath my Doctor Who outfit. And we were doing this scene, and we got rained on, Katie and I, and we got absolutely deluged. And we were doing it in an army camp. And there was a very tough regimental sergeant major who said, "Right, Mr. Pertwee, sir, you go in, my mess, sir. Anything you want, sir, my lady, you get him a cup of tea, any time like this." He was in a real sergeant major. And he treated me with great respect. "Is Mr. Pertwee, Dr. Who, sir?" "Yes, sir." So, I was very wet, and I went in, and my makeup lady says, "Oh my goodness, oh darling, you can't get the rollers." So my hair was put in Carmen rollers, and I sat in the chair. Then somebody, my dresser, came along and said, "Come on, dear, get those clothes off. Can't have you catching cold," he said. So he took the clothes off to dry them. So I was sitting in a chair with my hair in rollers, in long johns and a corset. And the door opened, and the sergeant major came and said, "Mr. Pertwee." He turned round to an unknown figure and said, "Oh my God, he's one of those." It's almost 3 o'clock. Oh, time flies. Now, I'm very glad that this the gentleman here, who I've never seen before in my life, who obviously doesn't know how to tie a tie, has come up here because I would just like to say something. I've been all over the United States, north, south, east, and west. I've been to many, many conventions, but I've never been to such a friendly convention, in a convention that has gone so smoothly, where there's so much affection, without any hassle. I haven't seen Roland with a headset on, shouting instructions to people, yet somehow, mysteriously, he's kept this whole convention going in the most miraculous way. Everybody seems to have had a good time, and I'm very glad that he's here so that I can thank him personally, giving my wife Ingeborg and I such a marvellous time. It's our first time here, and I sincerely hope it won't be our last, and I thank you very much indeed.
I've literally got to rush because I have a plane to catch, but I just want you to know this is the best convention I've ever been to. You've just been wonderful. Thank you.
And for the fans and people who worked, thanks a lot. You guys have been fantastic like usual.
I have to say one other thing too. I become somewhat blasé about this because we are so used to dear Sally and the rest of the B team that I forget. But they are a tower of strength. They are our friends, and we love them. And thank you very much indeed. And all the B team.